This video is brought to you by Nebula and TLDR's Race Across Europe. The EU is getting really fed up with Hungary. Relations have been tense for the best part of a decade, and Hungary's democratic backsliding has provoked increasingly punitive measures from the EU. Most recently, the rule of law conditionality mechanism, which the EU is currently using to withhold nearly €30 billion worth of EU cohesion funds from Hungary. Things hit a new low this month when the European Parliament voted to ban Hungary from holding the presidency of the Council of the EU, which it's due to take on in the second half of 2024. While the order of the presidency has been amended before, most recently after Brexit, suspending an EU member state for breaching EU law would be unprecedented. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why EU-Hungary relations are at rock bottom, the European Parliament's radical plan to ban Hungary from the presidency, and whether they should just kick them out instead. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a bit of context. Relations between Hungary and the EU have been tense for a while now. It was way back in December 2015 when the European Commission first decided to get tough with Hungary, activating its so-called infringement procedure against the country, in light of an asylum law that the Commission claimed was incompatible with EU law. Then in 2018, the Commission referred Hungary to the Court of Justice of the European Union over its new asylum law, known as the Soros Law, which criminalised any assistance offered by foreigners to people seeking asylum or residency in Hungary. A few months later, the European Parliament voted to begin Article 7 proceedings against Hungary, accusing Hungary of breaching the EU's values outlined in Article 2 of the EU's founding treaty, which include human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. Article 7 is pretty complicated and involves a whole lot of hoop jumping, but the basic idea is that if the European Council unanimously decides that a member state has violated the EU's principles, then they can suspend that country's EU voting rights. It's sort of the EU's nuclear option, but because it requires unanimity, it's pretty ineffective. In light of this, Poland and Hungary established a de facto pact. As the EU's recent troublemakers, they agreed that if either country gets to the point of being sanctioned under Article 7, the one not sanctioned at the time would just veto proceedings. This is why in December 2020, the European Parliament passed a new regulation that would allow the EU to withhold budget payments from countries which violated rule of law, known as the rule of law conditionality mechanism. This new mechanism only required the support of a qualified majority in the European Council, i.e. at least 55% of EU countries representing at least 65% of its population, and was clearly targeted at Hungary and Poland, who were both facing Article 7 procedures. This is the mechanism the EU is currently using to withhold some €28 billion in EU cohesion funds from Hungary. Anyway, relations have deteriorated even further since Putin invaded Ukraine, because Hungary is less pro-Ukraine than basically the rest of Europe. Hungary has held up basically every round of EU sanctions against Russia, and Hungary and Greece are now the only two countries yet to sign off on the EU's 11th sanctions package, which would target companies in third countries that are selling arms or dual-use components to Russia. Hungarian politicians have also parroted Putin's anti-NATO narrative, and Orban has rubbished the idea of Ukraine ever joining NATO. To give you a sense of quite how bad relations are, in December of last year, the European Parliament adopted a motion saying that Hungary could no longer be considered a functioning democracy and was better described as an electoral autocracy. Hungary also drew further criticism earlier this month when it said it wouldn't recognise the EU's new migration policy, which would set migrant quotas for all European countries and fine any country which didn't meet those quotas €22,000 per person. Anyway, you get the idea. EU-Hungary relations are at an all-time low, and this is why the European Parliament and some EU member states are now trying to prevent Hungary from taking the European presidency. For those of you who don't know, the Council of the EU is sort of one half of the executive branch of the EU, with the other being the European Commission. EU member states can be represented here by different ministers depending on the topic being discussed, and its presidency rotates between member states every 6 months. Because 6 months just isn't enough time to get anything done, presidencies are grouped into trios, with various topics split between the 3 presidencies over 18 months. Hungary is due to take on the presidency in the latter part of 2024, last in a trio including Spain and Belgium, and much of the EU isn't keen on being represented on the international stage by a member state that's currently in breach of EU law, which is why, earlier this month, the European Parliament suggested a resolution essentially saying that Hungary shouldn't hold the presidency, which passed with 442 votes in favour and just 144 against. The German, Dutch and Swedish governments have already expressed tentative support for the idea, while the Polish government has come out against it, presumably because they're due to hold the presidency after Hungary and are worried that something similar might happen to them. Clearly, there's little appetite for a Hungarian presidency within the EU. So, could the EU actually block Hungary's presidency? Well, the short answer is yes, it's at least possible. The European Parliament has already threatened to boycott Hungary's presidency, which will put real pressure on the European Council and the Commission to cooperate. And if they do, there are a couple of ways to limit or fully suspend Hungary's presidency. The order of the Council presidency has been changed multiple times before, most recently after the Brexit referendum in 2016, which means there's legal precedent here. According to Dutch NGO, the Meijers Committee, changing the order of the presidency to suspend Hungary only requires a majority in the European Council. If that feels too extreme, the other option is for Spain and Belgium to essentially Bagsy all the controversial topics on the agenda, so that Hungary would only have boring and unimportant topics during its presidency, which would limit its impact. So you get the idea. It doesn't look like suspending Hungary's presidency would be all that difficult, legally speaking. Perhaps the more important question is whether it would be a good idea. Hungary-EU relations have been deteriorating for some time now, and the EU's increasingly punitive measures don't seem to have helped. While Hungary isn't likely to be kicked out of the EU anytime soon, not least because there's no formal expulsion mechanism and the EU makes a convenient scapegoat for Orban, the downwards trajectory of relations is genuinely really worrying, and it's difficult to see how things might get better. There's also some other huge news, by the way. We've just launched our new series, TLDR's Race Across Europe. Take a look.
Go, Dan, go, go, go.
He's off.
He's off.
He's gone.
Dan's going.
I hate
and
this.
so are we.
I hate this.
Oh no!
Oh, it's harsh to my vibe, so hard. This is the worst thing that could have happened.
I mean, Jack is definitely laughing. There's no other way.
Guys, it's not looking good.
What? What do you mean? What do you mean?
We've come through some kind of police barricade.
I'm afraid she's dead.
I don't know where this Jeremy.
Look at those geese.
It goes so fast. Oh,
I know.
Now, you can watch the first episode on the TLDR EU channel right now. But we're also releasing every subsequent episode a week early on Nebula. So if you're a Nebula subscriber, you can watch the first 2 episodes right now, totally ad-free. That's true of all TLDR content, by the way. We regularly release our videos on Nebula before they come to YouTube, and everything's ad-free, so not even this advert is here. It's not just the race either. Every week, TLDR produces well over an hour's worth of content, which is exclusively for Nebula. That's exclusive discussions where our team share their thoughts on the latest stories, extended daily briefings, our Nebula series This Week in Parliament, and even full explainers. So if you want the full TLDR experience, you really ought to be on Nebula. Sign up now using our link in the description to get everything the platform has to offer for just £2 a month.